All right, so I'm going to attempt a reading of a particular poem from this collection, Gardens and Walls, which I'm not entirely certain that I've performed for before, at least for the YouTube channel, and in this manner that I have established for the recitation of certain kinds of textual representations of my poetry. Before I get to that poem, I should say something about the way that it fits into collections and performances in terms of set theory and sets and subsets of collections. So this is from the volume Gardens and Walls, and it's a particular poem within that collection of poems, and that collection of poems is part of a performance series that that grows out of a representational chapter of my work that I refer to as acts, and those acts involve different relationships to mental health and notions of madness and the experience of social articulations, across the performatively inscribed body and psychological experience of individuals that have received these diagnoses of mental illness, and it does so across time, and so it works with the experience of real and social relationships established with people in our world, and with ghosts and experiences from the past as well. And I'll read one of the pieces that is set in a real garden, and that in a certain way references a variety of kinds of ghosts, and some of those ghosts are familiar, and some perhaps not so much. But so within this construction of acts, there are basically three acts, and one could make an argument that there's a fourth act. I won't really get into that, but in the first act, the performances and the textual representations of those performances that grow out of the performances that become books, that are largely at this point lost, which in a certain sense I regret, and in a certain sense I don't. But Act One is essentially the asylum, and refers to actual experiences and performative experiences in asylums and in on mental health wards, and to histories of asylums. And then and there's a lot of crossover between Act One. It's not really all that linear, like the way that it would be in a Shakespearean play or some other classical play that more or less follows the conventions of the unity of time and space, which in fact aren't really Aristotelian, but are elaborated by later French cinema or theatrical critics as being derived from Aristotle. They're not really there. Aristotle does talk about a beginning, middle, and end, but these so-called unities of space and time aren't something that are completely explicitly articulated in the poetics. In any case, like I said, there's a lot of crossover, and as with all my work, time is very fluid and space is very fluid as well. But if one had to separate these and sort these out strictly, Act 1, is the asylum and the institution and the experience there, and Act 2 then is the space that represents, moments in time on Blackwell's Island, Roosevelt Island, and that variously I move, through these various ruins on this island, and these various gardens on this island, and again, both in space and in time, and in that present moment, in which I'm moving through that space, I will often move through the interiors of ruins, climbing through broken walls and beneath buildings and in rubble, and meeting various sorts of creatures, and and encountering various sorts of ghosts, and conversing with them in various ways, and receiving further additional information about the space. And then Act 3 is performed in moves from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I actually move from New York and my apartment in Astoria to Oceanside, California, and acquire a job working with individuals diagnosed with severe mental illness. And severe mental illness is let's see. There are various categories that are accepted within this program. It's an ACT program, which was kind of a pun on these acts. It's a long story, but in this space, I perform a job as a counselor and job developer, and work with people, developing life skills and acquiring for them Social Security benefits, identification if they need that, various sorts of things, and recording, the experience of this sort of aid that relates to a number of different, social politically relevant constructs of mental illness and its industry as it exists in the United States, including, the idea of Social Security and what that is, including the idea of a medical model and what that is, and all of the relationships, between those things. For example, I would write letters in this role as counselor, playing the part of the psychiatrist, who wasn't, particularly good at writing these letters in order to convince Social Security to provide benefits for these individuals, and I was really effective at that. I know that people don't perhaps regard me as a clear writer, and that's of course a choice that I make in terms of what I'm doing today, and that lack of clarity is very much an intentional strategy of the confounding of language, for various reasons. But anyway, that performance also resulted in certain byproducts that were textual in various kinds of ways, and gave me the opportunity while I was there to sort of refine some of that older work, and then present it in numerous contexts in different formats of publication. But this is from Act 2, and the poem that I'm going to read, actually I'll just take is is from this second section, Minahonic, which is the original name for this island that has various names as it passes through its history, including Blackwell's Island and Roosevelt Island. And Roosevelt Island is an interesting name because it's also referred to as Welfare Island, and that in certain ways relates to Act Two. And then my role in Act Two relates to a certain kind of welfare and charity, and but more than that, really was an attempt to explore what avenues are available in this realm in terms of assistance for individuals that receive this performative diagnosis, in terms of their establishing, independence, and in fact, what we learn in the third act is that that there are not, social apparatuses in place to do that, and that, William Blake, complains about the way that charity is a creation of it's a creation of need, right? That and if we create a situation in which people are needy, and then we alleviate the burden and the guilt of such a creation through the act of charitable giving. And what the third act was trying to explore within an ACT program, a sort of community treatment program, was this idea of what social integration would look like, and if it were possible, and it turns out not to be so possible, but anyway, the links between Act 2 and Act 3 and Act 1 and Act 2 are interesting, and one of the ways that those links are sort of manifested in a representational and strategic what would you call it, symbolic operative manner is through the use of references to individuals either known or unknown, but whose lives fall within these circumscribed boundaries of different kinds of notions of mental illness and madness. And Sylvia Plath happens to be one of those ghosts. So the poem that I want to read, and it does have some glossolalia in it, so I hope I won't frighten anybody with that. Very likely that I will. But the poem that I want to read today, and as I said, I'm not sure if I've provided a verbalization of this poem or not, but it begins with these lines from a poem of Sylvia Plath, and you'll recognize these lines because you'll recognize which lines belong to Plath because they're italicized in this poem. So Blackwell's garden is an actual garden that actually existed, before and sometime before and after the year 2000. In this period in which planning was being made to convert the old insane asylum on Roosevelt Island into a luxury apartment building, and that decision to transform this place, which in my mind was a place of the institutionalization of oppression and suffering and pain and human displacement into this luxury profit-bearing apartment complex was pretty powerfully offensive, and so that inspired it was really the inspiration that inspired me to leave graduate school and to perform this long piece that as I've talked about, it lasted more than a decade. And if you imagine that there was an Act 4, which was sort of the getting out of Act 1, 2, and 3, then which turned out to be more complicated than you might imagine. Performative artwork has trials and tribulations that so in many ways exceed those that are available in ordinary performance, whether that ordinary performance is cinematic or theatrical. And getting in is sometimes easier than getting out. So, one could argue that, there, and particularly if you want there to be some kind of like, I don't want to use the word transitional, and I don't want to use the word segue, but if you want there to be some kind of continuity, in lived experience and the performative work, and to make that work in terms of like there being, and I'll just use it, some kind of flow from both the performance into the next performance or the next series of work, which may be uncertain because there may not be an event like transforming a lunatic asylum into a luxury apartment, right? So if there's no instantiating event, like what direction that flow is going to, what direction that flow is going to take, it may be uncertain, and it may or may not coincide, with the flow of one's life, in terms of other elements that I won't say don't belong to the performance realm, because in my experience, there's really nothing that anymore that doesn't belong to that realm. But a lot of things have to coincide and sort of sync, and to for all of that to flow, sometimes it requires more work than one might be prepared or imagine initially. In any case, that's saying a lot, about the contexts, the various contexts and embeddings of this particular poem, and maybe enough and maybe not enough. So we'll just I'll randomly sort of move around in it and attempt a reading at the same time. Blackwell's Garden. The fountains are dry, the roses over, and the season now sits in winter's doorwell. Were there truly fountains here in the gardens of yesterday? Necklaces of jewels drawn up from the mud, embers of burning coal or wood glowing in the dark night of the black well, into which we were cast, one by one and in hordes like rats which populate abandoned buildings. Our memories, our terror, did roses cling to the walls of asylum? Did their delicate necks twist and turn, coil and wind around gates of hardened steel or iron, barbed, spiked, or wired? Did their blood-red blossoms mock us in summer, betray our impossible dreams in winter? Did their thorns speak the words of volumes of words that no one could utter?
Brotho kalimach, brotho kalimach, derach sinai,
the fragile wooden fence we climb so easily today, overgrown with weeds hardened and resistant to the ravages of cold, of bitter wind. Wild thing at the edge of the garden, we make our way into it.
Gal for him now,
there is an incense of death here. You can still smell it. Not in the fallow grass which lies dormant between the rows of pumpkin and squash, not in the sweet vines of the tomatoes or the fragrant earth itself, still rich and fecund with the gifts summer's insects left it months ago, but across the garden in the decaying edifice at the edge of the vast woof and web of its world, seeping from cracks in boarded windows as if it were still the same air exhaled by madmen tied to beds and chairs, beaten and broken, starved and left choking on the soot and filth of sane men's fears.
Yo tabek norem fagad sekadem vaterach Gadad, Borterach, Gadad, Barep, Naram.
Our day approaches, teeming with so much meaning it can hardly be said. The day of sane men's nightmares gone mad. The day the sun did not fall from the sky. The day of fountains and roses. The day of release. The day of immutable belonging to sun, moon, earth, sea, and sky, to the garden itself, where the luscious flesh of the fiery pepper glistens like the iridescent throat of a hummingbird, where the potatoes sink their teeth into the breasts of the soil, and the pears fatten like little Buddhas.
Morach, Sonam, Sonam, Morach, Sonam, Gerek, Sonam, Gerek, Sonam, Gerek, Sonam, Gerek, Vachem, Parach, Far, Storbek, Tear, Korain, Grach, Paran.
Though they are not pears, they have already withered, though they more closely resembled the dragon's teeth, through which our bravery is tested by rite of passage, trial and error, by dark night, flame and terror, by gods, angels, and men without names, through the fury of alien molecules, the burning of flesh, and the distillation of rage, through electroshock, needle, and the certainty of cage.
Othum falleth off, Othum falleth off, Othum falleth off, Dar Grinth,
And
Zaraluk.
thus fearful and trembling, we hesitate in our trespass until a forgiving sign permits us to take all that we wish, until beasts invite us to the banquet, until guardian pours us wine, until we see in that forbidden and interdicted fruit the satori we have measured in our dreams.
Farar, Nerik, Nerik,
Sadik,
Sadik,
Ye,
Kar, Ye.
And when at last we pick it and take it to our lips, teeth, and tongues, we discover ourselves transformed, little Buddhas of madness. The garden, a madman's nirvana, no larger nor smaller than we were, but infinitely greater in the communion of our belonging.
Tarar, Falo, Borech, Darar, Ma, Patek, Forem, Gobet.
A blue light of apotheosis is beaconing us to a place among the stars. A blue mist is dragging the lake in which each of us was drowned by unholy baptism. The blue mist of union, the blue mist of ghosts, with whom we find ourselves as one in the blue light of who we are, the blue scream with which we drag the lake of the asylum's past, the sea of its despair, the ocean of its wounds, the blue music of the words which echo from the minds and mouths of those once mad and to and through our own. Horeb, Karar, Sedo, Baeth, Nechar, Galech, Parech, Somech, Farom, Chalech, Soromet, Vares,